What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for The Altars, an interesting game combining making clones of yourselves who have lived different lives with some, I would say, much more traditional survival craft type stuff. But before we get into all that, to get my usual stuff out of the way, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a link below covering everything I go over, and my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. But in the case of The Altars, a few more things to know. For starters, this review is going up a day before the game officially launches on the 13th, which is, of course, possible because I was sent a review copy several weeks ago, in fact. And so I've had this game in my hands for, I believe it has been 3 weeks, which was plenty of time to comfortably get everything done. In addition to that, 11-Bit Studios, the developer and publisher, also sent me a press mailer for this one, which included some merch for the game. But with that out of the way, let's actually dive fully into this. You see, I've had my eye on The Altars for a while. In fact, my first exposure to it was a demo during, I believe it was a Steam Next Fest, where I was really interested in the core idea. And essentially, what you're doing here is, after being trapped on a planet, you use some special material to start creating clones of yourself. However, these clones have different memories and different skill sets than you in order to help you survive. The thing is, you have to manage all of their feelings about that, having regular conversations with yourself about the, sort of different ways this character's life could have gone, and combine that with some choice and consequence that takes place over the course of the game. In fact, you're going to have to replay this at least a couple times in order to see everything. It's a very unique experience that I can't really quite compare to anything else, at least as far as the story goes. Now, the sort of catch to that is, however, the rest of the game, the survival, base building, crafting side of it, is a lot more basic. It's very run-of-the-mill as far as those types of games go. And so while I think things like that story are really, really interesting, and I think they did a lot of great stuff with it and really leaned into that, the rest of the game, the actual gameplay of it, is honestly kind of basic. Even then, though, we do see a few difficulty options. We can adjust the economy of the world as well as the action elements. Now, the thing is, there is no combat or anything in this game, but you do regularly have to deal with things like radiation as well as various anomalies that will irradiate you, and that's what they mean by the more action-oriented elements, whereas the economy is pretty basic in terms of just resources you have to gather and spend. That said, these don't terribly influence much, so that combined with the fact that it's not really the type of game where you're up against some incredible challenge, it's not, a game that necessarily needs difficulty options to begin with. And so from there, let's start talking about the story setup and my thoughts on it. So, we play as Jan Dolsky, a member of what they call Project Dolly, various missions sent out into space to hopefully collect some miracle material known as Rapidium. Your ship is fitted with a special quantum computer that is meant to run, of course, the odds of success on these trips by identifying solar systems and planets most likely to have the substance with them. This is being done because back on Earth they are facing growing supply shortages. Rapidium, this sort of magic material, is capable of producing things, as the name would imply, very, very rapidly. It adjusts the quantum molecular structure of things to basically make them grow much more quickly. Meaning that with enough Rapidium, you can utilize farming methods and the like that will provide more food faster for those growing supply shortages. The catch here is when your base identifies one of these planets and sends the crew down to go investigate and start mining, unfortunately everybody dies. We are the lone survivor. After quickly making our way to the base on this planet that is suffering with irradiation as well as a sun that scorches the surface clean whenever it is in full view, we've got our work cut out for us. Basically, the goal is to, in every act of the game, gather up the resources and clear the obstacles that need clearing in order for you to move your rolling base forward to what will ultimately be the rescue spot. But in order to facilitate that, you can help yourself out by also gathering Rapidium along the way, so the company you work for, Ally Corp, has a reason to come save you. With the catch, as I've already mentioned, being that you can't do this alone. You have to start making altars of yourself. And that's where the story gets really interesting, because you cannot create every possible altar in a single playthrough. So just down to the altars you actually do make will change some of the story and side quests that you get via these characters you're interacting with. And while I think that would have been interesting enough on its own, what really sells it, though, is that there is actually even more choice and consequence tied to the narrative. There are some major decisions you'll make which are going to lead to different outcomes in each act and ultimately affect the endings of the game as well. And all together, all the different altars, your interactions with them, the different side quests they offer, as well as the main story and its choice and consequence is really the highlight of the game, and it's the unique thing about this game that makes it worth playing, in my opinion. Which brings us to the progression and gameplay. As I've mentioned, there's not really any combat to speak of, so the rest of this review is mostly going to be down to these factors. Because our goal, basically, is to progress, be that via gathering resources to make more altars, build more onto your base, craft the items you need to clear obstacles out of your way, such as being able to roll over a lava river, or sort of undo various anomalies in your way. And we're going to do that by researching, upgrading, and doing everything we can in order to survive. Now the catch to that is, you are up against a very soft timer. I know when I say timer, people are going to get a little worried about it, but it's really not something you need to be all that worried about. It is incredibly generous. And I think some of it might actually be based on your progress anyway. But the gist of it is you have to stay on a part of the planet that is not actively being scorched by the sun. So this planet and the way it rotates around its various suns means that you have the equivalent of weeks in game potentially before the sun is going to rise on your location. But once it does, it's basically guaranteed death. So you got to keep outrunning the sun basically as we move across the surface of the planet, and that acts as a sort of soft timer. This happens in phases. So in the initial phase, you don't have to worry about it at all, and while radiation does start during the nighttime, or at least the sort of in-game night timer, obviously, technically speaking, the entire game takes place during the night. But during what would typically be nighttime hours, radiation creeps in, and it's after the point at which you would normally have to go to bed and get tired anyway. Now, after so many days of that, eventually the sun will get closer, and at that point, the area that you are in will actually repopulate some resources to help you progress alongside of creeping radiation up closer, with the penalties getting more severe and giving you less time to gather resources and the like. So there is a tiny bit of time pressure, but it's honestly not that significant. Now, another sort of side effect of that time pressure is that each day is when the game is going to save, when you sort of wake up in the morning. That's when the game saves. You don't make manual saves, but the good news here is that the game makes a lot of these saves. That is to say, there's a ton of them, and you can load back to any day you started previously. So it's not like a single save, it just makes a save every day that you start. And while there is a limit, it is possible to go in and secure your individual saves up to a point, meaning that no matter what you're doing or how you're playing, you will always have certain saves of certain days available if you choose. And reloading those is in fact one of the easier ways to go back and see things you may have missed. In fact, the game sort of expects you to do this by going ahead and highlighting the options you've already chosen previously before you loaded a save, as an example. But during the day, you basically have so many work hours. Your altars, based on their mood and how well you are treating them, will work a certain amount of the day, but you can, via their assignments tab, eventually turn on things like crunch to make them work harder. And during emergencies, like the magnetic storms that mark the individual phases of the sun coming to greet you, they will automatically work crunch hours in order to not die. You, on the other hand, basically have until sunup to sundown, with the catch that if you work past a certain point, you eventually become exhausted, and becoming exhausted is going to cause you to wake up later the next day, which is also what happens if you ultimately become too irradiated. You'll be saved by your altars, but you'll wake up much later in the day the next day, losing, of course, time. Now, there does come a point in the day where you're simply tired instead of exhausted, and that's kind of your opportunity to go around talking to your altars if you didn't do it during the rest of the day. Now, the main reason we make these altars is to allow them to do things for us, so the tasks we would normally assign ourselves, such as setting up various mining operations to get certain resources back to us. We can instead have our altars go mine those, as they normally require you to actually operate them, as we have to mine things like metals, organics, as well as rubidium and minerals in order to get pretty much anything done. And this sees us going to those locations, scanning for the optimal point to set a mining facility, and then you operate that mining by setting up pylons from that mining outpost to your base to transfer the materials in, and then actually physically operating the machinery. These also act as fast travel points between your base and the individual outposts. But this isn't the only thing you have to do. You also have to make sure you're eating enough, which makes sure you have organics or raw food if you build the greenhouse. And each altar that you have with you is going to be specialized to a given role. allowing them to perform that particular task better than you or the other altars can do it. So not only will you want to make these altars to help you, but also making sure you're using them effectively by assigning them to appropriate tasks goes a long way as well. But as I've already mentioned a couple times, the other big part of that is simply the mood of these altars. As you continue to make them, you will have to keep up with how they feel, which involves doing things like their side quests, which can teach you lessons, alongside just making it easier to keep them happy. This can also be done through things like building the social room and watching movies and whatnot with them. But let's talk a little bit more about the altars themselves for a second. You see, in order to make more, as you do have an initial limit, you have to upgrade your quantum computer, which means you have to find these damaged computer chips out in the world, scattered by the crash when you initially landed on the planet, fix those chips, and then apply them to the quantum computer to upgrade its level. This will allow you to create more altars per phase of the game. Now, the technician and the scientist are mandatory. You have to have them, as the technician plays key roles in the story, but the scientist actually will also be your research facility, basically. He's going to research upgrades, new buildings for your base, basically anything you might need for the story, essentially, and so having him assigned to the research lab is essential in order to progress. The other altars, though, it's really all up to you. You can, again, not have all of them in a single playthrough, so you're going to have to play through multiple times just to see that alone, as each of them has their own side quest and whatnot. Now, I mentioned that they can teach you lessons. That itself also plays into the rest of the game, because these lessons are actually basically dialogue options that you can apply to future conversations, potentially unlocking different options or different ways through an obstacle. For instance, the botanist had a better relationship with your ex than you did, and thus often tries to bring her into any given situation where she can then offer different solutions, as she is a scientist herself. Just as a really basic example of how that can sort of twist and turn what is available to you in terms of overcoming your initial situations. And I thought that was a really fun way to handle that overall. But we're still not quite done, because then there comes the actual, base and building and crafting and everything. So your base is also something you can upgrade. You have to research expansions and rooms even sometimes, but you are making base in this giant sort of rolling wheel, and you often have to spend resources to upgrade and maintain various facilities. You will occasionally have to repair individual nodes of your base, which is the main reason you get the technician to begin with, but even that can be mitigated with proper research and upgrades. Certain core rooms aren't really negotiable, like the quantum computer, the airlock, the communications room to talk to Earth as they try to get you back home, and then more optional stuff which don't have a direct benefit, like the Rapidium arcs that you can build to transport the Rapidium back to Earth when you initially get saved, will also play a role in the ultimate ending that you get. But then there's the more dedicated gameplay stuff, like you have to traverse the individual areas you find yourself in, which involves dealing with things like radiation and anomalies. There are various anomalies that can affect all sorts of things. At just a base, they'll irradiate you, but then others will pulse. That is to say, they get small or big, and you have to sort of navigate that. Some will actively try to track you down and hit you to irradiate you. And there's even some stranger ones still. There is an anomaly that won't hurt you necessarily, but will do things like, say, dilate time, which means you lose time as you're passing through it. But there's also another one that does nothing besides obscure your vision and makes it difficult to move around, which then makes you more prone to running into other anomalies that could irradiate you. Just as an example. But most of what you're doing when you're not talking to altars and, building stuff is running around, gathering resources, or exploring the area that you find yourself in. That, though, does bring us to our Steam Deck section. Happy to report that while this game does have an unknown rating currently for the Steam Deck, I was able to download and play it there, and I honestly didn't have any trouble with it, with just a couple of things to know. For starters, the game will use the lowest possible presets in order to play there, and you get a pretty solid frame rate at that point. It also has cloud saves and controller support and everything, but the one thing I really did want to mention is actually more of a gameplay thing, specifically on the Steam Deck. You see, at the very lowest settings for this game, it's actually kind of really hard to see the anomalies on the Steam Deck screen, which means while they're very apparent when you're playing on, a proper PC, it's actually pretty easy to run into them repeatedly and accidentally on the Steam Deck because they're just really hard to make out against the backdrop of the rest of the game. And I wanted to point that out, but otherwise it seems to run perfectly well there. A frame rate dip here or there, but mostly it was a pretty good experience. And then before we start hitting positives and negatives, I wanted to talk about the technical state of this one. So happy to report that for the most part, the altars ran very, very well. I had very minimal problems with it. Pretty much everything I did encounter was cosmetic in nature. That is to say, sometimes the altars sort of bug out and their animations get really weird. Other times they'll get sort of stuck in like an area of your ship when they're supposed to be performing whatever their task is for the day. Now the catch there is, though, that doesn't actually stop them from doing the thing they're supposed to be doing. Like if you have them assigned to a mining outpost, but the game sort of glitches and it looks like their character model is stuck in the base or whatever, the game still counts them as being at the mining facility and you're still getting resources from that, so it's not anything more than a cosmetic issue. With the only other thing I encountered personally being that sometimes you get kind of stuck on terrain, or again, animations might be weird when you're climbing something, that kind of thing, but overall pretty minor stuff. So hopefully that is the case for everybody else when they wind up playing this for themselves, but I didn't have any issues. Moving on to positives and negatives though, it's pretty much what I've already mentioned at the top of the video. The positives are really the story, the choices, the consequences, interacting with these altars in what is ultimately a really, really unique experience. That I think is the chief reason to play this game, if anything. With the negative being that all of the gameplay around that experience is very run-of-the-mill. Nothing really to write home about, and while there are parts of it I enjoyed and how it plays into the setting and the environment, it's not exactly groundbreaking or anything like that, and compared to the extremely unique aspect of the other part of the game, it feels a little at odds with each other. But that does bring us to our conclusion, which is basically that for, I believe, a $40 launch price. They didn't send me the pricing information and Steam didn't have it posted, so I had to look it up, and everywhere else seems to be selling it for $40 US, which I believe is going to be the price. Which is good because $40 US would be about my personal limit for an experience like this, because again, the narrative aspect of this is really, really interesting and I had a lot of fun with it. But the gameplay is a bit uninspired, but if only for the unique experience that is surviving and interacting with these various versions of yourself in what is honestly just, again, a really unique experience, it's well worth the price, in my opinion, for that alone. Just don't expect to be wowed by the gameplay, which is obviously where we're going to wrap up this particular review. So in that case, I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, let me know how you feel about this one down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.